Hello and welcome to Partially Redacted, a podcast where we discuss privacy and security engineering related topics. I'm your host, Sean Faulkner, and today I'm joined by Charlie Summers, staff software engineer and data tech lead at Merit, and we'll be talking about privacy and security challenges of processing large amounts of government constituent data. Charlie, welcome to the show.
Hey, Sean. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So we met almost a year ago at Snowflake Summit. Somehow you had stumbled into our booth in the back corner of the Snowflake, near the Snowflake recording equipment, basically. It was not the most ideal conference expo floor location, but I'm happy we've been able to reconnect. And maybe we can start with some basics. You know, who are you? What's your background? And how did you end up where you are today?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Sean. I've been at Merit for about 3.5 years. I started more on the software engineering side, and about 1.5 years ago helped start and build out our data engineering team. Before I was at Merit, I worked at LinkedIn on data infrastructure, so kind of coming from big tech down to the startup world. When I joined Merit, it was a 30-person pre-Series A company where we were closed our Series A a couple months after I joined. And now we're north of 120 people and in the process of raising our Series C. And before my tech career, I actually came out of the boot camp background. So I was at a boot camp called 42. And actually, while in industry, I've continued to pursue additional education part-time while working. I'm currently actually working toward my doctorate in computer science focused on databases under Dr. Eugene Wu at Columbia University.
Oh, wow. You got a lot going on. You're at a Series B startup as well as doing your PhD right now. That's fantastic. It sounds like you've had tremendous growth over the last couple of years too at Merit. That's great.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to be along for the ride.
Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about what Merit does, and you mentioned a little bit about your moving from your software engineering role to more of the data engineering side, but can you dig in a little bit more to what exactly are your sort of roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, would it be helpful for me to go over what Merit does as a company to start?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So Merit is a digital credentialing company. So if you're an electrician in the state of Virginia, you have a digital version of your license on our platform. And we use that core credentialing platform to solve complicated problems, primarily for state and local governments. So to give a couple of examples of kind of markets that we are in, I was deployed on the ground, actually, a couple weeks after Hurricane Ian hit Florida back in October. And actually, my company, Merit, was there from a few days before the hurricane actually hit, where we were credentialing and allowing access for all first responders to all the different sites as they were, providing services, fire, medical services to that community. And then we actually built an application on top of our core platform that provides hours tracking for those personnel, which then the state of Florida was able to use to more quickly get reimbursed for from federal dollars for the federal disaster that was Hurricane Ian. So that's one big market that we're in right now, emergency response. Another one that we're in is education savings accounts. So we're currently partnered with the states of Ohio and Kansas, basically to help them disperse education-related funds to parents in those states. So parents who qualify are sent a credential, what we call a merit, on our platform. And they use that to access another application built on top of our core platform where they can submit claims and to allow them to get reimbursed for education-related expenses like textbooks or after-school programs. So that's a little bit about what Merit does. What I do within Merit, I run our data engineering team. So our primary responsibility is making sure that all data is able to be gathered in one place to support tooling to allow for transforming, visualizing, working with that data easily and successfully for all the different teams that need to. But most focused on our analytics team as they provide reports and dashboarding for our customers and for ourselves internally. And then finally, my team is responsible for protecting against all threat vectors and really securing that data and making sure that we're meeting the SOC 2, HIPAA, compliances that we focus on.
Awesome. And then what's sort of the makeup of that team right now? Like how big is it? What are the roles within that team?
Yeah. So right now we have a team of 5, including myself, on data engineering. So that's 4 people that are more traditional data engineers, and then we actually have one we call it like a data quality engineer, but they kind of come from a partial like QA background. They're actually shared with our sister team, which is the data analytics team, which uses the infrastructure that we provide in order to build pipelines and meet explicit customer or internal needs. And that's a team of about 6 people. So together we kind of make up the data team, which is 10 or 11.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So it sounds like a pretty good sized team relative to the size of the company that's just purely focused essentially on making sure that the data is flowing into the right locations and that, you're maintaining data quality. So you touched on this a little bit around some of the, applications of Merit. It sounds like you're dealing with, things from potentially government data, education data. Do you want to maybe dig in a little bit deeper to, what are the kind of data that you're dealing with and maybe comment around what is the level of sensitivity to that data?
Yeah, so pretty much we expect that all data that customers give us is PII. This is effectively credentialed information, so it's almost always related to a single individual and something that they did, whether that's an occupational license or some check-in, check-out record. It's all ultimately associated with a single individual. So we assume that anything customers give us is PII. We don't actually allow for classification within our system. We just, across the board assume it's sensitive as just kind of an easier way to make it so that customers don't accidentally, click the wrong column and suddenly something isn't as secure as they want it to be. Yeah, we do process some HIPAA data as well. We've had a couple, especially in the emergency response space. We've held some medical related information. So we also keep our systems HIPAA compliant. We do have to give some examples of some of the data that we work with. We work with addresses, phone numbers, even social security numbers, income information, how much someone's getting paid in a particular pay period might flow through our system. So we definitely try to handle it as securely as possible.
Yeah. So as, a data engineer that's maybe working on, and maybe this isn't applicable to you, but maybe to other people on your team that's working with, PII, potentially healthcare related information, maybe for the first time, what is sort of the mindset or types of challenges that they need to be thinking about when working with that kind of data versus maybe, essentially non-sensitive data?
Yeah, great question. I think that, so the first thing that we try to do is make it so that engineers don't have a gun pointed at their foot. So really trying to make sure that when they log into the system for the first time, they don't have just blanket access to everything that they ever could want to give access to. So in general, I think that companies take one of 2 approaches, and you'll probably hear me repeat this throughout this interview, but it's do they take the approach of allow access and then add on restrictions later, or do they keep everything restricted at first and then gradually allow more access? And we tend to be in the latter approach, where we really try to kind of keep everything closed off. But then we have gradually been building more capabilities to continue to do the transformation and processing that we need on top of that data. So for example, one tool that we're using in order to support this is a tool called Teleport, which allows us to do a time-based role escalation for someone that's potentially debugging some sensitive customer data, or perhaps we do build some dashboards that are leveraging sensitive customer data, but the customer is expecting to see it in the dashboard. So in those cases, we can allow for temporary role escalation, where while an analytics engineer is working with that exact data set, they can see that data, but otherwise they cannot.
Awesome. And I think one of the things you highlighted there around this sort of like two ways that a company can go where it can be like, hey, you kind of have access to everything and then we try to restrict, or we start essentially with like a zero trust model or extremely limited access, and then we give access based on specific business requirements or whatever. I think that's like the transformation that we're starting to see in this space and around. I think privacy in general is taking this sort of view of, hey, let's not trust everybody. Let's essentially add the access that they need for even like a time-based access, so that you can really limit the potential exposure of a mistake that could happen or a threat vector of some sort.
Definitely, that's something that we've really focused on, and I think that we've borrowed a lot of techniques that we see in the infrastructure like SRE space, where they have faced a lot of similar problems in terms of maintaining access to sensitive resources, and like tools like Teleport actually directly came from that infrastructure space and have more recently been coming into the data sphere. So we look to our friends over in the SRE land to maybe think a couple steps ahead of where best practices are aiming at, which we found very successful.
Nice. And then you mentioned Teleport, but what else is in your data stack? Can you share a little bit about what tools are you essentially using today to build this data engineering pipelines?
Yeah, so we are a Snowflake-based shop for our data warehousing needs. We use dbt pretty much exclusively for transforming data. So all SQL-based pipelines leveraging dbt. We orchestrate that with Airflow. In particular, we use Google's hosted Cloud Composer within GCP. For ETL, we use Fivetran, and we also ingest some data directly from Kafka Streams using the Kafka Snowflake connector. Reverse ETL, we use HighTouch. For visualization, we use Sigma. And then giving a shout out to just our core platform itself, which is what our traditional software engineers work on top of and build out, which itself does some data processing and builds the containers that the merits that we send out to individuals. That's all written in Golang, and it's an event-driven service with Kafka as the underlying event layer.
Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned running some of this on GCP. Are you a GCP shop then?
Yeah. All of this is GCP under the hood.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And then can you maybe we can walk through essentially the life of a piece of data? If maybe we can take a specific example and talk about where does that essentially start its life within Merit, and kind of where does it end up, and what life cycle does it go through?
Sure. Yeah. So there's definitely a couple of steps here as we receive data from customers and ultimately provide it to their constituents in the form of credentials that they can use and have verified in any place where they could otherwise use a physical license. So I'll give an example from the education savings account world. So we're partnered with the state of Ohio here as one of our two current customers. Ohio basically has a CSV, I believe it's on an SFTP server, that is basically their up-to-date list of who they want to have able to access this particular program. So what we do is in a daily load, we actually have integrated with, so there are two ways to load data into our platform. You can either give us a CSV, which is like a flat file with your data, or we actually have a feature that we call integrations that is actually under the hood powered by Fivetran, where we use effectively a white label version of Fivetran that we've extended with custom connectors for our government specific use cases. And customers can kind of link some database, Google Sheet, Airtable, or in Ohio's case, this SFTP server, where it'll basically automatically do an extraction on a daily or even a more frequent basis. From there, data is ingested into one of our microservices where we ensure that it meets the schema that we expect the data to be in. Basically, customers can define that schema within our platform, and also encrypt the data right then and there. So we actually encrypt, if you imagine a CSV, we're encrypting at the cell level with a customer-specific encryption key. So really making sure that as soon as data gets into our platform, we're encrypting it as quickly as possible. And then it gets stored to a Postgres database there as an encrypted format and gets sent downstream as a Kafka message, also in that encrypted format. From there, we have another microservice that basically listens to all of these data sources as they get ingested and combines those using what we call templates in our platform into the actual credentials or credentials, also known as merits. You might also hear me using the term containers. There's some internal lingo there that I'm referencing that are the actual credentials that people see within our mobile app, or there'll be reporting on for the actual organizations. So really the goal here is we encrypt. We try to have data always encrypted when it's on disk, meaning that we encrypt at the application layer, and then right before we give it to a customer, we'll decrypt it on the server side before sending it to their device. And then basically users can have multiple of these data sources that they kind of combine together into these containers that that are these credentials that they can send to their constituents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like, if you take the SFTP example, you're going to have an encrypted connection essentially to the SFTP server, and then you're encrypting at a cell level with a customer level key, and then essentially that data is going to stay encrypted throughout the lifecycle of it through your pipeline, and only decrypted when you need to essentially send it on to the customer. So you're limiting the potential exposure of that data through its entire lifecycle within your systems. Is that right?
Definitely. And what I imagine we'll talk about maybe here soon is once we've encrypted all this data, it does restrict some of the things we're able to do with it. So we've built some workarounds to make sure that we still can do things like query by a field that a customer gives us. For example, they often upload an email address to us for the email, the point of contact, point of digital contact for a particular constituent. We still need to do lookups by those particular values, stuff like that. So we've come up with a bag of tricks that we use to still allow us to support that sort of behavior.
Yeah, I want to dig into that bag of tricks, but maybe before we get there, for the encryption key management, so you're using essentially different encryption keys for your customers. Is that something the customer is managing, or is that something that you manage on behalf of the customers? How does that system work?
Currently, we manage it on behalf of customers. We're very interested in eventually supporting a bring your own key model, but we're not there quite yet. And definitely, I think that while all of our customers are very security and privacy conscious, we eventually have aspirations of helping out perhaps in the DoD or the FBI sort of space. And as we approach those markets, things like bring your own key models are often become par for the course. So that's a direction that we are interested in the future.
Hey there, Sean here. I hope you're enjoying this episode of Partially Redacted. If so, please subscribe so you can always check out the latest episode and help others find the show by leaving a rating and review. Final thing before I get you back to the interview. If you're interested in privacy and security, have a challenge or issue you want to discuss, or want to share your expertise, please join the Partially Redacted community at skyflow.com/community. All right, now back to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the DoD is probably not going to trust you with their encryption key management. So maybe we can dig into this bag of tricks. So obviously you want to encrypt data in order to protect it, but the downside of encryption is that it can limit your ability to actually utilize the data without decrypting it first and then performing some sort of operation on it. So how are you dealing with some of those challenges while still essentially maintaining security of the data, but allowing people to actually utilize it?
Yeah, definitely. So first and foremost, we are in we tend to fall in the most secure but least accessible version of encryption. So particularly we're using non-deterministic encryption. So we really have, no idea, even if two values are the same, two decrypted values are the same, when they are encrypted, they'll be different values. So we can't necessarily do things like joins or calculate some sort of aggregate information on top of this data. So what we actually do is we all of the data as it enters our platform eventually ends up, in our data warehouse in Snowflake, and we basically we've built an integration with Snowflake, leveraging a feature called Snowflake External Functions. I think y'all might be aware of this feature. It's definitely used by a lot of folks in kind of like the tokenization and encryption space, which basically allows us to do on-the-fly decryption of data. So effectively, it looks like a function within Snowflake. But what it does under the hood is we have a serverless function running on Google on GCP's infrastructure within the same physical data center as where Snowflake is running, and it sends batches of data to this service, which then decrypts it and returns it back to decrypts it with the appropriate customer specific key, and then returns that value back to the calling process, which allows us to kind of while we're querying Snowflake, have it doing that decryption on the fly. Now, of course, the question is, once we've built this capability, how do we manage access control to this particular piece of functionality? Because, if you encrypt a whole bunch of data, but then have a tool that just decrypts it whenever you want, well, you might as well have not encrypted the data. So once again, this is where we leverage that teleport tool that I mentioned earlier to make sure that when folks have access to this data, it's well audited what they're doing with it, and time-based so that the other point is time-based so that it expires after maybe 4 hours or 8 hours, and then finally we make sure that we have confirmation with our customers themselves that we are doing this sort of processing, whether it's and normally this looks like some sort of statement in our contract saying that we're supposed to be doing data processing or data cleaning on their behalf. That's kind of how we make sure that we're using this tool in the ways the customers want us to, instead of just using it all over the place.
And then using those external functions in Snowflake, are you able to connect essentially the user identity in Snowflake to your understanding of who that user or customer is on the merit side, so that you're pulling the right essentially encryption key information for them?
Yeah. In terms of which, what org, whose org this data is, so that we can use the right decryption key. Is that what you mean?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So we, luckily, this is all props to Snowflake for building cool integrations like this. We can basically pass that in that function call where we pass what that org specific ID is, and then use that to look up in, I believe we're using Google Secret Manager to pull down the right key and use that for any further decryption.
Yeah, that is actually a very similar process to what we support at Skyflow, with essentially detokenization through external functions in Snowflake. And then the other, with this process, have you run into is there any performance challenges? What is sort of the size of the data set that you're working with?
Yeah, great question. So there definitely is some performance overhead, and we're still doing some tuning and processing, or some performance tuning to make sure that we can have this thing running as fast as possible. That's where I would definitely give a shout out to folks like you at Skyflow who already have done all this tuning, because there's definitely some engineering effort on our end to try to have a similar type of behavior. So in terms of data volumes, in general, we have about 7 terabytes in our entire Snowflake warehouse. That includes stuff like backups and also operational data. So it's not just customer specific data. But when it comes to the actual number of merits in our system, we have millions of merits in our system. We have a couple million users on our system, so individual unique users that we've sent merits to, sent credentials to. And then several thousand organizations that are issuing these credentials.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so pretty sizable amount of data. And then, are you leveraging any of the existing privacy and security features of Snowflake around how you're essentially protecting some of the data?
Yeah, definitely. So all of access to bulk decrypt as well as access to data sets themselves, and we also do at this point we do some masking of data. in certain places as well, particularly places where it's not like data customers have provided us, but maybe, like HubSpot data, CRM data that also has, private information. We definitely leverage like Snowflake's role-based access control, and continue to improve the way that we're kind of managing that access control and making sure that people are, scoped to the data sets that they need. So that, some data masking, and then we particularly leverage external functions for like a security related use case.
Mm-hmm. And then, so you're using the RBAC system in Snowflake. Is that the primary way that you're controlling access to the data?
Yes.
And then I think you mentioned this briefly earlier, this idea that you're logging or auditing certain amount of access. So is it whenever someone's like sort of touching the data, that information is logged somewhere?
Yeah, so luckily we lean on Snowflake for a lot of that, in terms of them providing query logs that we then do. Like we do an audit every 3 months of like who has access to what, as well as doing some like query log analysis to try to understand anomalies. We're definitely I think we still have room to improve in some of that process, particularly on the auditing side, to make sure that we are really being fine-grained and making sure that there's no access that is unexpected. But we have invested some amount in that space, and I think that we're moving in a good direction. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of queries, and we do our best to keep track of what's going on everywhere. Sorry, what was the other part of your question?
Oh, I was just asking about what was how did auditing and logging work in the system?
Yeah. So the other parts, Teleport provides some additional logging on top of the out of the box, on top of just like role escalation. But I would say primarily we're leveraging kind of Snowflake's built-in logging for our current solution.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned quite a few, tools that you're using to sort of protect the data, both from things that you've built directly within Merit, as well as some of the tools that are built into Snowflake. Are there other tools and technologies or techniques that you're using around both protecting the data, governing access, as well as actually allowing people to use it that you haven't mentioned?
Probably the only one that I haven't mentioned is the way that we manage all of our RBAC system and our access controls is we use Terraform for all of that. So we have it infrastructure as code where it can be code reviewed by others instead of like going directly into, a Snowflake worksheet and making those changes directly. That makes it a little bit easier for us to kind of manage as well as audit what's going on. We also have actually like built a dashboard that helps us with some of our auditing, particularly around like RBAC auditing to make sure that people are slotted into the right places. So we have like a refreshing dashboard that I think refreshes daily that allows us to do that auditing a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm. I like that idea of the infrastructure as code for essentially controlling your RBAC policies. It makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like you've done a combination of using some existing tooling as well as building some custom stuff. So how did you kind of think through the process of, where do I build versus where do I buy something off the shelf in order to build a solution that's going to make sense for Merit as well as for the customers that you serve?
Yeah, for sure. I think generally, we're a fast growing startup. We don't have tons and tons of engineers. I think our engineering team is a little over 40 people at this point in time. So we try to buy, overbuild, in most situations. Really, when we choose to build, it's when we consider it like within our core competency and something that, our customers, our investors would expect us to have like a complete amount of control over. And we couldn't necessarily, push blame somewhere else if something really happened in that particular instance. So really our primary core competency is providing like a flexible and easy way for customers to build these credentials from whatever data sources customers have, as well as individuals that have been issued these credentials, having an application where they can go in and use these credentials to satisfy whatever use case we've been supporting them with. The other place where we feel it kind of within our core competency is like making sure that our customer data, like our PII, is secure and private. I would, I know you're I definitely like helped earlier on with an eval of Skyflow for potentially like having y'all handle that particular challenge for us, and we chose to not go with it. But for anyone listening to this podcast, if you're not if you don't consider that part of like a core competency of what your business does, like Skyflow does awesome work, and like what you're doing is really cool, and certainly it would save anybody a lot of engineering time and a lot of stress. Just one more thing to worry about. But yeah, for us, we made the call to instead like build out those pieces ourselves.
Well, that's great. I mean, I think I had asked that question not to solicit a promotion for Skyflow, but I appreciate the sentiment.
Genuinely, I do like what y'all are doing. It's really cool.
Awesome. And then clearly there's been a lot of thought put into both your data engineering pipeline, but also thinking about like how you handle that from like a privacy and security perspective and having a really good privacy security posture. Why was it something that Merit chose to prioritize? I think a lot of times with startups, especially in the early stage, it can be very easy to think like, well, we need to worry about customers right now. We don't need to necessarily worry about these other things. We can figure those things out later on. How was that sort of thought process, or what was I guess like the thought process behind making this a priority and sort of a core competency for the company?
Yeah, I think that. I would say that like in the very early days of Merit, Merit's been around since about 2016. There might have been a similar sentiment, but it was back around when I was joining in 2019 where we realized that we really wanted to go after government and like the government use case. To give an example, before we were actually in government, we actually still do all of the credentialing for much of the skydiving industry. So if you jump if you show up with a parachute at a drop zone, you can't just like jump into a plane and then jump out of a plane. They want to make sure that you are certified, that you've jumped out of planes before, so that they're not like seeing you splat against the ground. So this was actually the first market that we targeted when we were starting as a business, and one that is much less privacy centric. But as we decided to have our go-to-market strategy really be focused on what we think is like the most important credentials in our ecosystem, what we think of as like verified identity, the most important pieces of verified information. We decided that government was the focus, and if we're going to be storing stuff like social security numbers, we need to make sure that we triple down on this, because we don't want to be the back door that ends up on the front page of some New York Times article or whatever, because like we exfiltrated data out of some state, and personal data that affects an entire set of constituents. So it's really just the importance of the data, and like for us, there's like a big moral component there. The other piece, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier as well, is we are interested in going after even more secure markets. So going after DoD, going after CIA, and helping out those like even more tightly secured organizations that are doing such important work in the world. So if we want to even start competing for the RFPs for those businesses, we need to be to go above and beyond in our security and privacy posturing, so that we can really provide the value there that we think we can.
Awesome. And I think it's great and comforting to me that you can't just show up at a skydiving location with a backpack and be like, I'm ready to go. And they don't check anything. So I'm glad to hear that. And then do you also think about, you mentioned like going above and beyond. Do you see this also as kind of like a, privacy as like a key differentiator for the business as well?
Yes, we definitely do. We are in and hope to continue to be in a position where, as we think about things like, maybe national privacy laws for consumers in the U.S. They already exist in other countries, but in the U.S. that it doesn't really. We'd love to be in a position where we can be advocating for more privacy and not be in the position that I think we often find ourselves in tech, where we instead have to be like, no, we can regulate ourselves. Like we'd rather have oversight. We'd rather have the people's will, enacted, and like really make sure privacy is first and foremost protected for folks. And I think that that's also been a big benefit for us.
Awesome. And then are there, future technologies in this space or maybe even in the data engineering space that you're, particularly excited about?
Yeah. So, I already gave a shout out in the privacy space to like these data vault technologies, like what y'all at Skyflow are doing. A little bit more broadly in the data engineering space, very interested in kind of the rise of, I guess, like broadly the need to do less ETL. So Snowflake is coming out with a feature Unistore that they announced at last Snowflake Summit that is really exciting to me, because if it can compete on cost compared to us just running our own Postgres servers, then we're in a position where all of our data is already in one place and we end up having to move it around less. That even has an impact on the security side, because there's just less places you need to defend, which is always a plus. The other piece of technology that I think will really change the way that we at least build our data pipelines, being like a really SQL-focused shop, are all the companies working on like incremental view maintenance. So Materialize as like a first-class service kind of focusing on this. But I think I've heard that like Snowflake, Databricks, other warehouses and data lakes are trying to provide this capability where instead of needing to regenerate a view or a table from scratch every single iteration, it kind of looks at the most recent diff of data and updates just those necessary pieces. There's been a lot of really interesting and promising work out of academia in that space. It'll be really exciting to see that hit industry over the next few years.
Yeah, I think that there's one of the trends I've seen as well, which goes along with what you were mentioning in the beginning, is there's just this trend now of moving data less. It's less of, a lot of these concepts around like the data warehouse, ETL, have been around for a very long time, but with newer technologies like Snowflake and some of the things that they're doing around, creating native data apps and so forth, it's making it so that it's not about transporting some subset of the data over to some new location, doing a bunch of operations on it, and then, bringing it back. You can essentially do a lot of that stuff natively within, where the data sits, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, and I think has huge security implications, because, if we have 10 copies of the data, that's 10 more places to secure and, make sure, there's good access controls on and all that sort of stuff. So I'm very excited for that too. Yeah.
Yeah, you just end up with compounding your PII sprawl problems essentially by moving the data around. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'll give a shout out. At Merit, we're definitely hiring. If you want to check out open roles, as well as we actually keep our pay bands public, so if people are interested in how much money they'd make, www.merits.com/careers. That's Merits, MERITS, with an S at the end. Other than that, if you're interested in working on these types of problems, helping out Gov, would love to chat with you. And then other than that, Sean, thank you so much for having me. I've really, really appreciated this. It's been awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much for being on the show. It was a lot of fun, and I'll include that link in the show notes as well. And I appreciate you going through so much detail and being so transparent about the work that you're doing at Merits. And thanks again, and cheers.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. Talk later.